Will you be remembered after you're dead? The Z-List Dead List podcast about obscure people from history with me, Izzy Lawrence. Hello and welcome to the Z-List Dead List. I am Izzy Lawrence and it has been a very warm summer, very warm indeed. I spent much of yesterday actually walking around London. I recorded a bit of Making History for BBC Radio 4. You have to say BBC Radio 4 like that, it's in my contract. BBC Radio 4. I've been doing Making History. You can catch up on that by downloading the Making History podcast. Last week, which has only just been on because I'm recording this on Tuesday afternoon, I talked about pews. And next week I shall be talking about loos. Lots of squatting in my Making History career. However, we're not going to be talking about Making History or even the British Museum member cast. No, we are talking obscure people from history, and we are back at the British Museum to hear Jo Caulfield. Now, Jo Caulfield, I introduced her in the show, but oh my goodness, she is one of my favourite here. Yeah, no, I was going to say she's one of my favourite comedians. No, she's a hero. She's brilliant. And I was so chuffed to get her onto the Z-List Dead List. Not her, she's not dead, but shut up, you know what I mean. She came to talk about one of these boisterous, brilliant women of history. You're going to absolutely love it. If you do like her, and you do like her, you've seen her on telly and everything, but if you do like her, do go and see her shows at the Fringe this summer. The Edinburgh Fringe is an amazing place to catch up on all the Z-List Dead List stars. I know that Alice Fraser is going up. I know that I think Mitch Benn is going up. I know that Alex Farrow is going up. Paul Duncan McGarity is going up. But Jo Caulfield, oh my goodness, you need to see her. I think her show is called, she says, getting her notes out just to get that right. Yes, her stand-up show is called Killing Time. It's on at 20 to 8 in the evening at The Stand, which is an amazing venue. Check out everybody on at that venue. It's the venue I played. You're going to like every single comedian on at that venue. Also, she's got a show called Brexit Play, which might have to be rewritten currently because I think Boris Johnson's resigned yesterday, so anyway, brexitplay.co.uk, you can find out all the details about that. I'll put all of her notes in the show notes, but yes, Jo Caulfield, Killing Time, 1940 at The Stand. That's 20 to 8, not back in time. It's 2018, it's going to happen. Anyway, enjoy me introducing Jo Caulfield live on stage at the thank you very much, British Museum.
That is the advertisement over. Are you interested in podcasts now? Yeah. Exactly, so there are two podcasts you need to download, the Z-List Dead List and the British Museum Membercast. And yes, I sat through the meetings where they're deciding the name and I let them keep Membercast, even though it does sound like plasticine and a gentleman's wang. So... I was very quiet and so happy when they went, no, that's really sensible. Should we use #membercast? Yes, we should. Yes, we should. So enjoy that every time you hear me say it. Okay, we are going to crack on with the Z-List Dead List. Now, you've heard two fabulous people of history that are worthy of your vote. Will the next person be as fabulous? I want you to welcome to the stage your next historian, and she's utterly brilliant. I've worked with her in the past, and I absolutely adore everything that comes out of her mouth, and you will too. Once again, we are not British Museum members here, sat historically nerdy. No, we're Americans. We're going to whoop and cheer. In fact, we're not even Americans. We're macaques, okay? If you fancy grooming each other during this, you're welcome to. Otherwise, laugh like a macaque, like... anything you like, okay? You can pick fleas off each other. You can eat... I was about to say eat nuts, but don't eat nuts. That might cause a choking hazard, and that'll be bad. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, will you please welcome to the stage Jo Caulfield!
Thank you. I thought you were taking it away. And so I'm not a historian. And unlike John, I don't have a history A level, I have a history O level. So the show is going down, okay? So be ready for that. And the person I've picked, and she is a Z-lister, but she's also on a list that is entitled History's Nutcases, which I think isn't a very nice way to refer to people. And she's not insane or a lunatic, but it's very interesting the way her life is portrayed. There's a lot of talk about her in the newspapers, and you will pick up the tone quite quickly about what people thought about her. Now, she has a very lovely name. She is Mrs Caroline Giacometti Prodgers. I think Prodgers is a good name. And she became notorious, and that was how they always referred to her, as being notorious, because she waged a crusade against hackney carriage cab drivers because they were overcharging people. And for some reason, the press took great offence at this. And so they talk about her and they say, now she was notorious from about 1870 onwards, and she was known as the cabman's Nemesis. She was sung about in music halls. She was featured in a cartoon in Punch. And it was said that if you were strolling towards a hackney carriage stand, you would hear cries of Mother Prodgers, and then all the cabs would gallop off so they wouldn't have to pick up Mrs Prodgers as their fare. She actually successfully sued 50 cab drivers for overcharging. She became so notorious that on Guy Fawkes night, cab drivers burnt a huge effigy of her on a bonfire. This is her in a cartoon in Punch magazine as she is entering the cabman's shelter. So there she is. And they've made her a very bad-tempered woman. The cabmen are all there drinking. They were allowed to drink and drive their cabs at that time. So they all run off as she's come storming in. This is how they reported her in the press. It was said she was a thoroughly disagreeable and bad-tempered woman, which made me like her enormously. Because I just sort of, in that, sort of age when women were meant to sit around and listen to men and just be like, oh, you're incredibly clever. I don't know how you managed to do all the things you do. You really are amazing. I like the fact that she just seemed thoroughly unpleasant and didn't really care if people liked her or not. Now, she gets very fond of going to court. The first court case is when she gets divorced. 1871, she began divorce proceedings against her husband, an Austrian naval captain, Battista Giacometti. That's where she gets that bit from. Now, significant that she divorced him in 1871 because of the Married Woman's Property Act, which came in 1870. So she had inherited a lot of money from her mother. And so once they had the Married Women's Property Act, because before that, obviously, women had to give everything they had to the men. They could still say it was theirs, but they weren't allowed to do anything with it. Like if you owned a house, you'd go, no, you can't sell that, darling, because it's mine. You could earn money, but you would have to give it to him. And you couldn't sue people in court. You couldn't enter contracts. You couldn't even have debt, which I suppose was the one good thing. So I think pretty much as soon as that law passed, she went, right, well, I don't need you, really. I could have all this myself, seeing as it's my money. So she takes him to court, and it was a time when quite a lot of women, it was in the papers, her divorce, because it was seen as a precedent, because suddenly lots of women who had their own money were getting divorced. It was kind of like everything that the men feared might happen did happen. They absolutely suddenly woke up and went, oh, right, oh, so I don't need you I can just fuck off, lovely, and take my money. And they didn't, and the women, managed the money quite well. They didn't do, men would just go, oh, but darling, you can't have the money because you know what you're like. You'll just see the first kitten you see, you'll give away all the money. Yeah. But such was her desire that the husband should have none of her fortune at all, that in the court case, she actually tried to say that her children were illegitimate. She said in court that they weren't his children, that they were all bastards, so why was he to have any money because he wasn't anything to do with the family? Now, I think this makes her look quite bad because what happens next is the entire family, her family, took his side and said, no, you have to give him a settlement because he is the father of your children. So she did have to pay a settlement. Just after the court case, she was also taken to court by the shorthand writer that she had hired in the court case but refused to pay. She also sued her cook, who she had dismissed, and it was claimed, this is what they wrote in the papers, she claimed she had dismissed the cook, but the cook was still hanging around the house and singing. which I think is a great revenge, isn't it? Like if you get sacked from a job, just keep turning up every day going, "Do, do, 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 do." But I've sacked you. I go, yeah, but I'm going to hang around and sing. It's quite annoying, isn't it? Shouldn't have sacked me. She also sued a newspaper seller because she refused to pay the whole price for the newspaper because she says there was an article in the paper about her, so why should she pay the full price? When she had provided some of the content. She was very ahead of her time, content provider. She then had the actual court case with the newspaper seller was because there was then a tussle over the newspaper, which I could imagine because she wouldn't pay, but she said, oh, I'm going to have it anyway. And her dress got ripped, so she sued them for ripping her dress. She also, and this is a lovely one, she sued a watchmaker, with fabulous irony, for not bringing her watch back in time. So, she is now newly divorced. This is her, as you can see, she actually looked. She's a bit odd looking, because there's something odd about the way she's standing, and I think that hair doesn't look good on anyone at all. It really doesn't. That's a very unflattering look. And also, I don't know why, why is she wearing like a gingham top? It's sort of like two bodies being put together. I don't know, it seems like they've got two photos and gone, well, they were so bad, let's just put a bit of that one. Put that skirt, that photo in that skirt, she looked quite nice at the bottom, but the other top on top of her, it doesn't seem to look like a real person somehow. But that is her, so she's now newly divorced, and she's thinking, oh, I need a hobby, right? So why not crusade against London cab drivers? Now, this is the 19th century, so London is very, very busy. There's nearly 7 million people living in London. There was two types. There was the hansom cab, so that was the more city-up one, and that's just got one horse. But that was seen more for men. And they thought it was a bit fast of women if they sat in that kind of a one. So that was more for gentlemen. And then the woman went in the Clarence, which was also known as a growler. Sounds a bit weird. I know. And that's the one that has two horses and looks a bit more like a stagecoach. Now, being a cab driver, that was a pretty good living at the time. It wasn't a bad living, and it was quite a safe job and also not too arduous work. And the cab drivers now, they had tried to regulate them. In 1858, there'd been a move for cab drivers to use a newly patented machine called the kilometres register. And what it would do, it would indicate the number of miles travelled and the fare to be paid. Well, that sounds marvellous. Everybody's happy with that, except the cab drivers. So they refused it. They said they wouldn't be regulated. They said they didn't want to be treated like criminals or infants. So they just carried on behaving like criminals. The fare, they said, it's perfectly fine. This is what they actually said. The cab drivers union said it's perfectly fine to leave the fare to the discretion and honesty of the cab driver, which is a ridiculous system. It needed somebody to mount a campaign. So in 1870, people were trying to regulate them, but it's not going very well. So they thought, all right, we'll publish a table of fares. So they have a table of fares and there are places to go and how much it's going to cost you. But you have to get to Waterloo first. Because all the fares go from Waterloo, and then you have to work it out from there. Now, they were meant to display this in the cabs, but of course they didn't. But Mrs Prodgers had memorised the table, and she also studied cab law, so she had extensive knowledge of the law because she loved to go to court and sue people because it was her new right since 1870 Women's Property Act. So what she would do is she would ask to go to an exact location, and it would be a location just before or exactly at the point where the fare would change to the next stage of the journey. Invariably, the cab driver would overcharge her because they would try to charge her for the next stage of the journey, and that's when she would apply for a summons against them and take down their number. So she was right, because they were ripping people off, and she'd worked out how to do it. But again, the way it's reported seems very unfair to her. So she would say, you're overcharging me, and then the cab driver would go, no, I'm not, right? And then it said, that Mrs Prodgers would then goad the irate cabman. Why is he irate? He's the one overcharging. Do you know what I mean? So she would then goad the irate cab driver to such an extent that he would then resort to swearing and verbal abuse. As would any man, it seems. And then she would apply for another summons for grievous abuse. Right? Now, she did successfully sue 50 cabmen, took them to court for overcharging, and it was constantly put in the papers as though she was this sort of figure of fun, and even the judge suggested to Mrs Prodgers that maybe it would be cheaper for her to purchase her own cab rather than keep going to court. And they did portray her as a very ridiculous, sort of a formidable woman. And there was a song, and it says it was a very popular song in music hall. Comedian Herbert Campbell, he used to perform this song about Mrs Prodgers, and people would go, "Oh, isn't she hilarious, old Mrs Prodgers?" Now, this is the song. As I say, don't blame me. They say it's hilarious, right? And I imagine they do it in that kind of, all bit cockney, aren't we? But you know what I mean? Old music hall. All great men have their statues, and it's but their due. But I wonder why the ladies don't have them too, eh? Don't you wonder that? I bet they did that sort of thing, If they did, to the academy I'd like to send a bust of Mrs Prodgers, the cabman's friend. And I bet people go, "Oh, that's hilarious." Right? And I love this. Of all the strong-minded females, she's the worst I ever saw. Because they're bloody awful, those strong-minded females, aren't they? At the corner of every cab rank, her flag should be unfurled as a horrible example to this wicked world. Oh, hilarious, Herbert. How do you do it? So there was clearly quite a lot of misogyny going on here, and I think it's because there was a mood at the time because women's suffrage was becoming a thing. So they don't really want these women, going to court, causing trouble, and not just sitting at home and being quiet. There was, I think it was, it was all around the 1870s that different cities were getting women's suffrage movements. Manchester had one, London had one, Edinburgh had one. Women's suffrage movement. Oh, what do the ladies want? Oh, some tea would be lovely, thank you. And there was also this thing that if any woman wasn't behaving the way they wanted, then that she would be portrayed in the media as very ugly and unattractive and unfeminine. But if that didn't work because they were actually attractive, then they would go, "Oh, they're a bit loose," and sort of slut shame them. As has not changed very much. So, like the newspaper reports, this is important. This is how they report it. Mrs Giacometti Prodgers, and then they put, as she insists on being called. Well, that is her name. What a ridiculous woman. What's her name? But this is in the newspapers, so she's insisting on people using her name, which is just ridiculous of her, for God's sakes. Then it says, Mrs Giacometti Prodgers is as rude to fellow members of the public as she is to porters and cab drivers. Upon being offered a cup of tea by another passenger on a steamship she was travelling on, she replied, wait for this insult, "I have only had afternoon tea once in my life, and that was with the Duke of Sutherland." I have no idea what that means. But I am going to adopt it as my new heckle put-down. Next time for club, if someone shouts, "Oh, get off your shit," I'll go, "I have had tea with the Duke of Sutherland." Burn. So now this is what I like about it, because if you I think, she does seem quite a bad-tempered thing. But then it also reports in the newspapers, it is surprising that Mrs Prodgers has one very loyal fan, a gentleman of some standing. Yeah. Sir Richard Burton. So I thought, well, I'll read about Sir Richard Burton. Now, it said he was very interested in her cases, and she would come round, and apparently he didn't accept a lot of callers, but he let Mrs Prodgers come in, and they would sit and discuss her cases, and he would offer advice. And so I looked him up, and he's bloody great, right? He is. He's listed as, he's an English explorer, translator, writer, soldier, cartographer, ethnologist, poet, fencer, spy, and diplomat. And his obituary in the Athenaeum, it said, he would have attended higher office, but he had a Byronic urge to shock. So I thought, oh, I like him. While in India, he became a proficient speaker of Hindustani, Gujarati, Punjabi, Sindhi, Marathi. He also kept a large menagerie of monkeys in the hopes of learning their language as well. Now, this is the thing I think they bonded on, is that they were both a bit rebellious. Now, Sir Richard Burton had a long interest in sexuality and erotic literature. However, the Obscene Publications Act of 1857 had resulted in many jail sentences for the publishers. So they thought of a way round it. A way round this was the private circulation of books amongst members of a society. So they could do all kinds of smutty books and just go, oh no, it's just our society books. So they created, with his friend, great name, Forster Fitzgerald Arbuthnot, and they created the Kama Shastra Society. It says Shastra, I don't know if that's how they say it. But basically, they would print sort of mucky books and read them. He wrote, and I love this, it was the longest and most explicit essay on homosexuality ever published. And he said, it was said, he considered it a natural and common inclination suited to hotter climates. So I thought, well, he sounds great fun. So if they were friends, then I do like Mrs Prodgers. Now, sadly, so she's had a good 20 years of taking the cab drivers to court. And then her friend, Burton, he dies. Then she dies in 1890. And even her obituary is, Mrs Prodgers, the terror of London cabmen, is dead. But now, again, so this is 4 years after she died, they tried to bring in a meter for the cab drivers to use. Because, and this is in a book, which is it's a good read, Omnibus and Cabs, Their History and Origin, published in 1902. And it says, women know from bitter experience that every time they hire a cab, they are running the risk of being cheated and afterwards abused for daring to protest. So this is exactly what she was saying all the time. So they go, right, we're going to regulate them. And they put these things in called taximeters. And again, everyone's like, oh, this is great. We can get a cab. We know what we're going to have to pay. Again, the cab drivers said no. They went on strike. They wouldn't have it. But some companies started to use them, and they found that the general public would not go in a cab that didn't have one and would wait longer to get one with the taximeter. So then eventually all the cab drivers went, all right, we'll all have to have these taximeters and we can't rip people off anymore. And then they invented minicabs. So I feel that Mrs Caroline Prodgers, I think she did us all a good turn, and although people I don't think would have heard of her, I love the fact, I like her as someone with an obsession, but I thought it was very, very useful as well. So I think she's a good Z-lister. Thank you.
Joe Caulfield, ladies and gentlemen.
So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you also spend some time listening to the British Museum membercast if you have the time and opportunity. Latest episode is about Queen Nefertiti's bust, and not her tits, unfortunately. Her actual bust, which is pretty awesome. The next one I'm working on is actually about the sea. Yeah, what's about the sea? What about the sea? Well, the history of the sea is actually really interesting. And I'm not talking about the fish, I'm talking about people who went across it and discovered stuff and got lost and sank boats and all sorts. Anyway, it's fascinating. So that will be out at the end of July. Hopefully the first week of August or at the end of July, I might be able to release the next episode of the Z-List Deadlist, which will hopefully be Alice Fraser, if I can get hold of the audio. So enjoy your summer. Enjoy Joe Caulfield. I know you're all going to go up to Edinburgh just to see her. Do that. It's a good idea. Her show, Joe Caulfield, Killing Time, 1940, at the Stand. And also go and see, I think Pippa Evans is in it as well. And I shared a train ride with Pippa recently, and I like her a lot. So brexitplay.co.uk, find out all about that. In the meantime, please have a look at the Facebook page, chat to me on that. Get in touch through izzy.com, that is iszi.com. You can see all the old episodes on the zlistdeadlist.com. And yeah, I hope you're just enjoying the weather, really. I've got writing to do, and it's very difficult to do writing when it's hot. It's also quite difficult to do writing when it's cold. Writing is hard. You've been listening to the Zlist Deadlist podcast with me, Izzy Lawrence. To find out more, please visit izzy.com, that is iszi.com. To support the show, share this episode with your friends, use the PayPal button to donate to us, and yeah, just tweet. Please do, tweet, share, Facebook, all of that. It does mean a lot to me. If you can also leave a little review on Stitcher or iTunes or wherever you're picking this up at, please do that. It does bring people to the podcast. We've had a little bump of numbers recently, and I'd love to get another one because, you know, woohoo, it's good that you listen. And also listen to Making History and the British Museum Membercast. I've been Izzy. You've been awesome. I'm going away now and drinking some ice.